Welcome to Tomorrow Never Knows with me, Bob Wilson, and Sir Warren Brown of the Beatles Kingdom. Our very special guest today, we're honored to have Ken Mansfield on the show. It's a real treat for us to have him on and a pleasure. So welcome, guys.
Welcome, Ken.
Thank you. It's great to be here. Been looking forward to talking to you guys.
All right. Thank you, Bob. Would you please tell us about your working for Capitol Records and how you came into the sphere of the Beatles?
Yeah. In fact, a lot of it, as you've heard many people say, was being in the right place at the right time. But I was working at Capitol Records, and I'd gone to work there first working day of 1965. And I talked my way into a job I had knew nothing about. I was in the Saturn Surveyor Space Program in San Diego, and I was in a folk group and became friends with some people from Capitol. I kept running into them when we were touring around and stuff. And one of them asked me one day, he said, you know, you have a degree, bachelor of science degree in marketing. Did you ever think about getting into the record business? And I went, yeah, in my dreams, you know, I never dreamed of making, and so Capitol Records, I used to drive that place on the Hollywood, by there on the Hollywood freeway, and I just get chills. There's something about that building. Never dreaming someday I would have an executive office in that tower. So anyway, that guy from there called me. He was the head of artist relations and a four freshman manager, and told me there was an opening, and if he sponsored me, would I be willing to interview for it? Well, I had no experience, and there would be such a cream puff job to be the district promotion manager in Hollywood, which meant I would work with all the artists in Hollywood and do, you know, all their club dates and TV shows and cocktail parties and everything, you know, just working with the artists. And of course, all the artists were in Hollywood. No matter where the artist was stationed, they would end up in Hollywood. So it was such a cream puff job, and Capitol was really the #1 label at the time because we had all the big acts, the Beach Boys and the Beatles and all that. So I went up and interviewed, and 40 guys that had experience interviewed for that job. And I don't know how I talked my way into it, but I got picked. So I go to Capitol in January, and in August, I'm working with the Beatles there. Now, the reason for that is Capitol was a very formal company. And so my job description was any artist was in the West Coast district. That was my job to take care of them. So the big executives didn't jump in and say, well, we're going to take the Beatles, you know, you just step aside. They honored my position. So I was the guy that worked with them. And during the time that they were there, I became friends with them. Besides, I was a young guy. You know, they've been working with nothing but the executives, the chairman of the board of Capital Industry and the, lords of EMI and all the top people. And now all of a sudden, for a few days, they're working with a young guy that's their age and kind of cool guy. I had the Cadillac convertible and the suntan, the house in Hollywood Hills with a pool, and everything they had kind of dreamed about growing up. And so I was, in a way, as intriguing to them as they were with me. You know, I mean, it was just a natural thing, and they felt comfortable with me. And
right.
The thing that I think that established the relationship to go beyond just business relationship, but actually a feeling of a friendship there was, I was not in awe of them. I mean, they were another act to work with. I wasn't like uncomfortable. I wasn't in awe. I didn't want to have to have my picture taken, or I didn't ask them a lot of questions. I just hung out with them like anybody else. They invited me up to their house that they'd rented in Benedict Canyon, I think it was, and we just hung around the pool for the day, you know, just hanging out. So
right.
That's a long answer to your short question. But.
Yeah, that's all right. I would have been very in awe of everything. I'm complete opposite of you, and I would have been bowing to their commands. But they must have had tremendous amount of respect for you to give you such an important position.
Yeah, and I think it was because it was Hollywood, and it was the national, the national office, international office, whatever you want to call it. And I was a young guy. I was one of the youngest executives at the label at that time.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
And they could relate to me on both a business and a personal level. I think that was what it was about too.
I wanted to ask him about Apple, I think, when they chose him to head Apple.
Well, okay, I worked with him in '65 on when they did the Hollywood Bowl and all that tour. When I put him on the plane, I thought, well, that was neat, you know, and they'll forget. They came back in '66 and say, yeah, hey, hi Ken, how you doing? You know, so that was kind of cool. I worked with him in '66 again, and by that point, I thought, you know what, I think I could end up working with these guys or working for them. So I just felt that. But then, but put them on the plane to San Francisco. They did their last concert up there, and 2 years I never heard a word. So I thought, well, that's the end of that dream, you know. Okay. But then they started setting up Apple, I think late '67 or something like that. Anyway, we get a call that they're going to set up Apple, and they're coming over and we're going to announce it in America. Now, I had moved up in 2 years, so now I was the head of all promotion and artist relations and all that. So when they came over, when Paul came over, and Ron Cass, the president of Apple, and when they came over to set up the label, I again spent like several days with Paul. And during that time, because it was a big deal setting up the convention and all this stuff like that. So during that time, I really got to become friends with Paul and a close relationship with Ron Cass, who was the president of Apple. And so they go back, and then not too long after, Stanley Gordico, the president of Capital, gets a call, and they said they'd like Stan and me to come over and help them to set up Apple in London and prepare the launch in America. Now, America was the #1 market. They were smart enough to know they had to break their records and their label in America to establish a worldwide record company. So we put all the emphasis on really targeting America. And so, right. And anyway, so we go over, and there's lots of pictures in my books of me sitting in meetings with them in London with them at that time. And so another fellow joined us, Larry Delaney, who was the head of press and publicity for Capitol. And when we got back, we didn't know that they were looking for somebody to be the U.S. manager of Apple Records. And so we get back, and then they get a call. Gordico gets a call that they want me to be their U.S. manager of the label.
Wow, that must have been really nice.
Yeah, and go to London, and oh my gosh, it was just amazing. Because I'm from Idaho. I grew up in the country, so this is pretty extreme for me.
Right. Well, I'm basically from the desert, so that would have been amazing for me too. What were your most outstanding projects that came under your watch? Was the White Album your first one?
No, actually the White Album was the album that encompassed most of my time with working during that White Album period, you know, the recording, the preparation and all that. But the Apple launch itself, because we had to establish that label, we had to really make sure the labels took off with their first records, and they had selected Hey Jude and Revolution as the two sides for their first record. And then they had the Mary Hopkin record, Those Were the Days, and Jackie Lomax's record with Eagle Laughs at You, and what was the other? I forget the other side. And then this group called Black Dyke Mills Band, which is just a thing it was a marching band, kind of crazy. But anyway, so the idea was to launch the label with those 4 records, and the problem was deciding on the single for the Beatles.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the thing is, at that time in America, 2.5 minutes was, 2.5 minutes. Your record had to be that short because the radio station wouldn't play the singles any longer than that.
Right. Well, that gets into my next question. Can you tell me about their most popular single, Hey Jude?
Yeah.
And was it actually Paul who felt that 7 minutes and 11 seconds was possibly too long to record to be a hit?
Well, now here's the thing. You got this band who is also being cutting edge and trying to defy convention to, to a certain degree as much as they could. But now Paul was a businessman. And Paul did take the lead in this part of the thing. And he was a businessman, and he knew this fact about them not playing records over 2.5 minutes, basically. So we sat in a room. We didn't have furniture in Apple yet. They just painted the building and carpeted it. And we sat on the floor, this big room with a big sound system in it, listening to Hey Jude over and over and Revolution. And Paul was just concerned. He wanted to play it by the numbers, and he was just concerned that Hey Jude, they wouldn't play Hey Jude because it was too long. Now, as I knew at that time, the Beatles could have burped on a record and they would have played the whole thing. But he was so concerned. So we just kept kind of going over on the same thing. And I finally said, Paul, if you'll trust me with an acetate, when I fly back to LA, I will stop off in Philadelphia. I stop off in Miami. I'll stop off in St. Louis, in some of the major markets with the guys that are known, the music directors are known for picking the hits. They're the geniuses of what makes a hit record. Mm-hmm. I said, and when I get back to LA, I'll call you and tell you what I found out. Well, he did, and I did, and everybody I played it for fell on the ground. So I got back and I said, consensus is it's a go. And so he just relaxed, and away we went. We went with Hey Jude.
Well, I'm glad you did that, because it is an awesome song and one of their best. That's for sure. With that being said, I'm going to hand it off to the Bulldog. I'm going to let him bark for a while at you, and I hope you don't mind. He don't bite. He just barks.
Okay.
The Beatles, as you were alluding to, changed their image often and stayed on the cutting edge and seemed to be searching. And it seemed to be above just music. Tied into that seemed to be like a spiritual quest. I know they were very influenced by the Maharishi. I was wondering what other spiritual influences you might have noticed that they had, been looking into or been seeking. Any thoughts you have on all of that?
Well, you guys are the historians, and that during this time was that I was working with them when that whole thing kind of faded out, except for George. But the whole time I was with him, not once did we ever talk about spiritual matters, except when I spent time with George, he did, and that was a different thing. And he would talk about why he was his beliefs, and he centered on why he didn't eat meat and all these just different things that were really interesting to me. And at that point, I had no interest in sitting around staring off into space and wearing white clothes and having a guru. All that stuff just sounded weird to me. But George was so kind and so gentle and just so just beautiful in that way. And when my life did start having problems, somebody said, well, why don't you meditate? And I said, well, I don't want to do that, And they said, no, you don't have to have a guru. We have a guru. Our meditation practices are taught by a guru, but you don't have to follow the guru. You don't have to do anything. You can just do your meditation, clears your mind, gives you peace and all that. That's really all there is to it. So I thought, well, here's George, and he was so gentle and kind. So, and by the way, in retrospect, I grew up hard country community church, and the pastor never smiled, and I thought I was going to go to hell before I got home after every church service. He just was, the fear of God was just placed in us. So I like this idea of just, so anyway, I start meditating. The next thing I know, they say, well, the guru's coming to America. Why don't we're going away for a week retreat. I think you'd enjoy it, So I went away. Well, eventually, man, I got hooked. And so it wasn't George and it wasn't his guru that I ended up following, but it wasn't George. It was just his conversations with me and his image that got me into that. But as far as the rest of them, Ringo and I had maybe a little bit later on when I represented him, like in the 90s, but never came up. And I think if it did come up, I think I would have just slept it off because I wasn't really interested because of the way I grew up.
At some point, did that have an effect on you besides George telling you about it? You got more deeply into it or no? The spiritual things like meditation, did you get more deeply into that? The Indian mysticism or anything like that?
I got in 10 years. I became a teacher. Became the #1 Chela. Chela is a disciple of the guru, and he would include me in things, and I made his recordings for him. I got Kenny Rogers to give me studio time in his studio in LA, and had the guru flew in from India, wherever he was, and we recorded things that he could use internationally. And next thing I know, I'm teaching meditation, I'm doing astral projection, I'm doing a talk and chanting, and and I became a leader for 10 years in that movement.
And it's funny, like I would have assumed, and it's not good to assume, right? But I would have thought it came more from the Beatles. But George talked to you a little bit about it. It seems from what you're saying. But when you did get into it, were other people speaking to you about it, or did you just look yourself from what you'd seen glimpses of? How did you get so immersed in that?
Did the Beatles talk to me about that?
Well, you had said that you kind of got into that on your own. Yeah. It wasn't so much that they influenced you in the mysticism. I was wondering, was it people you were hanging out with, or just that you had heard about it, or? No,
it was just this one couple. I was having dinner with them one night, and that's when I said, gosh, everything's so messed up, and I'm just really, and that's when they said the guru thing. So it had nothing to do with anybody else, and yeah, I told him, and by then I had left Apple. This didn't happen until after Apple, when I got into this. So I wasn't really working. I was spending a lot of time with George still then, and with Ringo, but not all four of them anymore. Or John, really never anything with John. I only saw him once after I left, I think. Oh, yeah, at Ringo's house. I got together with John once then, but that was it.
And as a solo act, you did work with Ringo a little bit. You helped him with a recording contract or something.
Well, yeah, his career was first funny to think of a Beatle having a hard time. But Ringo had just made some bad choices in some recordings he made, and both he and I kind of overdid the drug thing, and kind of pretty much out there, and we both went off and sorted ourselves out, and we got back together in the 90s, and I represented him for his Time Takes Time album, and it was at first with a lot of people it was a hard sell because Ringo just hadn't been delivering on things, and I found the perfect label for him, Private Music, which was the president and owner was Peter Baumann, who was in Tangerine Dream, pretty popular European act, and he was European, so Ringo and him got along well. Ringo didn't want to be on a big label because he was tired of the big conglomerates, and Private Music was a private label, but it was distributed by RCA, so he had the best of both worlds. He had a small label distributed by a major label. So it just worked out well, and I got him a giant budget because Peter Baumann wanted to have history to having had a Beatle on his record company, so he was really paying for, I think, the historical aspects of it also, and just gave us all the money we needed to work with for the album.
So later on, you went over to Nashville, and you seem to have had a lot of success in Nashville. But could you tell us about how you came to go there? And what was going on?
No, well, I grew up country, and when I was at Capitol and MGM and at the CBS Barnaby label, the country roster was always, from the beginning, when I was at Capitol before I was in any kind of position to be working with the artists on that level, they just all migrated to me because I could talk like Tim and I understood him, and I grew up, I never heard anything except the country record until I was probably 17 years old, so. The country thing, I just naturally so when I became president of Andy Williams' label, CBS label, Barnaby Records, I was in Nashville for a convention and looking for artists. I was producing some artists, and I ran into Waylon Jennings, and Waylon and I just hit it off. There was something that happened between the two of us, and I actually left Barnaby so I could produce Waylon. And so I had 5 years with Waylon, and as an independent, and produced Jesse Coulter and Tom Paul and some with Willie, all the Outlaws. And so that's where my success in Nashville really came from being the producer to the Outlaws at the time, which was just a gigantic. And for me, being with the Beatles was incredible, and what an honor and what an experience. But I didn't have anything to do with creating their success, you know. But with the Outlaws, we took it from playing, you know, in bars to headlining major auditoriums, you know. So that was something I really felt I had a part of, and it was a very deep relationship between Waylon and I. So that was a kind of more of an accomplishment than anything. And nothing will beat the time with the Beatles. I mean, you can't top that. But there was something more rewarding with the outlaw movement.
Well, the outlaw movement, it's incredible that you'd be involved with the Beatles and then the outlaw movement too. I find that incredible. I love Willie Nelson. I love Waylon Jennings. You also worked with the Gaithers. I also love their music. What was your experience with the Gaithers?
Well, the Gaithers, this came about during my downtime when I lost everything. And so I thought, you know, I've gone broke here in Hollywood. I had made some bad decisions and all this, and just got in some bad real estate deals and all that. And I totally got wiped out, and I'd been, you know, maybe partying a little too hard. So I wasn't really doing my craft the way I should, because now I was really committed to producing and running my own company, and I just was not delivering either. And everything finally went under. So I thought, well, I'll go back to Nashville because I've been so successful there. And I went back to Nashville, and I couldn't get a job in the record business. For some reason, the doors were closed. Now, here's where God enters the picture, because why wouldn't I, a guy who would run, you know, the Beatles record company and had all this success, why couldn't I just waltz back into Nashville? But for some reason, the doors were closed. I couldn't understand it. But there was a guy there named Daryl Harris, who was the president of Star Song Records. And I met him at church. I'd become a Christian then at that time, and met him at church. And he had this concept. There was an nitty-gritty dirt band album called Will the Circle Be Unbroken, where they'd gathered all these legendary old musicians and pickers and made this album. And Daryl Harris had the same concept with Christian artists. And one of the Spear family, or one of the legendary people, died, and he thought, I got to get on this because all the old legendary people are going to die before I get this album made. And he knew my work with acoustics. I was really, you know, really good with acoustics, and I'd worked with famous people. And the problem with the Gaither album was we had all these legendary people on it, but they all had their own producers and managers, and nobody ever got along, and nobody would ever agree on, you know, well, we want to use our producer or something like that. So here I was, somebody that had a good track record in that area, but I hadn't any enemies. I didn't know anybody in the gospel music business at that time. So I was really a natural selection for Daryl. And we were producing the album. I was producing the album, and we were doing some mixes. And the tenor, Jim, what was his name? Anyway, we're standing looking up the speakers, listening to playbacks, and he said, you know what, we're going to win a Grammy with this album. Oh, I thought, you poor deluded child. I've been down this road so many times thinking I'm going to get a Grammy with an album, and I never had. And sure enough, we won a dub and a Grammy with that album. So it was really a special thing, and it was my introduction to gospel music. And
well, congratulations on that one. When you got down to Nashville, was there a woman who you met who called you to task and challenged your spiritual beliefs?
Well, I hit Nashville with my guru. I mean, I had my guru, and I was, you know, still involved with him, and used to drive her crazy because she was a sold-out Christian, and she had spent the last year really just pressing in, and basically hadn't even dated for a year. And when we met, I was taking a break. I'd been there less than a week, and I had been doing some stuff in Tom Ball's studio producing his new album. And I took a break with my engineer, at a nearby Music Row restaurant, and she was in video, and she just had finished a video shoot and went there after the shoot, and she had taken a girl that she was witnessing to. Now, my engineer and I were there, and she walks in, and this other girl, and my engineer was facing the door, and he was gay. And he said, "You got to look at that." So I looked, and I just saw her. Oh my gosh! And I tell you, when a gay guy picks out a girl for you, you got to figure, you know. Anyway, I kept looking at her, and then sitting at the table. And after a while, I just was staring at her. So her girlfriend got up to go to the restroom, and I walked over, and I want to apologize because I've been staring at you, and that's very rude. And I just feel like I should apologize to you for that. And would you like to go out for a drink sometime? And well, she had no, you know, I mean, here I was a stoner, I had a guru, I was broke, I was bad news, and we had no business. And also, I wasn't really looking for a continuing relationship because I just come out of, you know, failed relationships. But something about us, we just clicked. So we went out. I asked her to go out for a drink, and she said, "No, but I'll go out for dinner." Well, I didn't have any money, but anyway, I made it happen. Sorry, excuse me. So we went out to dinner, and something just clicked immediately, and we started dating. But we had this problem because, you know, I had my guru, and she just kept saying, "Well, you know, Jesus is the way." And I said, "Well, no, he's a way." You know, I agree. He's one of the ascended masters. He's one of the great all-time philosophers and great spiritual men and leaders. I said, "So he's a way." She said, "No, he's the way." Well, we, for some reason, kept dating, and it just became such a giant argument that we almost couldn't get past it anymore. And she was taking me out to all the Christian rock concerts. She took me to see Mylon Lefevre and Broken Heart, and Rich Mullins and Petra and Stryper and all these different kinds of bands, you know, feeling that she could get to me that way. And also, she would take me to her church, was a church where all the great musicians played in the worship team. So she was really trying to witness to me and bring me in a way that maybe I would understand more through the music. But I just couldn't commit. But I was getting it a bit. But I just wasn't quite, you know, getting it. And so one night she called. She said, "We need to talk." And I said, "Okay." And we get together, and she said, "I see how deeply our feelings are becoming for each other." And she said, "I could see where this potentially could head, and I cannot become unequally yoked. So I have to choose between you and Jesus." And she said, "Can I choose Jesus?" Bam. So I went home and thought, you know what? I want to believe in something so strong that I'm willing to give up something I really care about for. And the fact that she'd been talking the talk and witnessing to me all that time, but when she walked out her walk with that, it just did something. And I was starting to get it, but when she did that, man, the needle went past 50% over to 51%, and I wanted to have what she had. And so she's responsible for bringing me to the Lord. So as I say now, the first person I see every day when I wake up is the person that saved my life, you know. So.
And can I ask for further explanation? Like, you use the phrases "a way" or "the way." Yeah. And I've had those discussions with people, and there was a time in my life when I didn't know Jesus, and I would have said, you know, why do they have to make him the way? Like, you know, come on, it's a little bullheaded. I like some of what he did. But then I had an experience where I realized Jesus was God. So he was the way. But could you like flesh out those terms a little bit for somebody who might not have heard that before? Like a difference between a way or the way?
You know, I don't think I'd ever had it drop down to the simplicity of that, the way and a way. It was the way means the only way. It's the one and only. And I was willing to accept several people as being great teachers and and spiritual leaders and all that kind of stuff. But here's the thing that happened too: is when you're a New Ager, there's a million things for you to consider because there's so many belief systems in that. And so, everything from crystal healing to all this kind of stuff, what's it when you smell stuff, all these different things. And I had a stack of books at home that I was always trying to read through because there were so many things to learn. And when I became a Christian, I had one book, and it was just simple. And so here's the other thing that happened is I was used to getting up every morning and cleansing myself and preparing myself and spending my time in meditation and pray and all these things. And so when I became a Christian, I was extremely disciplined. And this, I think, was one of the best things because God's the greatest economist of all time. He never wastes, there's not 1 minute wasted in our lives as soon as we give everything to him. Amen. And so that 10 years, turns out, was a teaching time for me. But also, when you think about the Beatles, because I'm going to move ahead a little bit, when I used to think I was a hotshot because I was with the Beatles, but what really was God was giving me a platform because people would be attracted. And the thing was, well, if this guy was the Beatles, then he must know what he's talking about. And if he says Jesus is Lord, then gosh, he was with the Beatles. So we should probably listen to this guy, So God had, those times was just preparation. It was just God weaving a tapestry and putting it all together to when I got saved. And then what happened next is I became an author. And then my first book was really successful. And now I'm getting invitations from churches to speak. And so 15 years on the road, speaking at churches and events and prayer breakfasts and all that kind of stuff. And a lot of people came to the Lord during these times. And Connie did one powerful witness, but the eventuality is her witness to me ended up being a giant witness to a lot of people. So we really need to think about what we're saying when we talk to people, because people are watching us. And so, I'm not sure I'm answering your question, but
you are.
Yeah.
And if I may ask, can I ask how you became a reverend?
I'm sorry, what?
Can I ask how you came to work in the ministry?
How I came to work in the ministry?
Well, you're also a reverend, aren't you?
No, I'm not. I was an ordained minister. I say, because I quit touring and didn't feel I deserved the manor anymore, so I let my credentials expire. But I was a minister. I wasn't a reverend. I wasn't a pastor because I didn't have a flock, and so I was an ordained minister and spoke at some of the biggest churches. I started out speaking at Alistair Begg's church and. Rick Warren's church and David Jeremiah, Dr. Jeremiah's church. I spoke at some of the Rock Church in San Diego, Harvest Church. I mean, some of the biggest churches there are over time, and it was all by invitation.
So God really used the time you had before, which is an amazing thing. Most of us would love to have even spent a day doing that.
Yeah.
And you got to, that segued into this wonderful, ministry and outreach that you have. So that's really, it warms my day to hear that.
And also, this is, I think this would be of particular interest to you, is I thought, wow, when I became a Christian, all I had was rock and roll. All I had was crazy friends. I thought, okay, I'm not going to have any friends anymore. If I'm going to lose all my friends, I'm going to think I'm crazy. And the strangest thing is, I didn't lose any of those friends. It's almost like I sensed this bit of respect from them that I had made this kind of decision. And I think they actually honored that in a way. And of course, my new set of friends were the friends that have lasted forever. All the old rock and rollers have faded off, into the distance. But the Christian friends, are still here.
If I could sneak one more question in before I hand off to Warren again. I was deeply affected by Bob Dylan's three records. He put out Saved, Shot of Love, not in that order, and Slow Train Coming. I was wondering if you ever were able to hear those and you identified with them, or if maybe you didn't listen to them. Just curious.
No, I didn't. And this is this is worldly type stuff, but Dylan and I did not get along. And so I just thought he was a phony. I mean, that was my judgmental thing, you know, and before I was a Christian. So that just went by me, you know, Nashville Skyline, all that stuff just went past me. And that was just my own judgmental worldliness and you know, that kind of stuff. And Dylan could have written War and Peace, and I would have said it's a piece of trash, you know, so.
No, that's fair enough. It was just that I had never really been told the gospel in a deep way, other than maybe seeing Billy Graham on TV. I grew up Catholic, and it was kind of cold, and nobody was really on fire for it. And I'd never really heard the gospel or read the Bible. And when Dylan put out those three records, it was really the first exposure I had to it, you know, and that's why I asked, because, you know, those songs, not necessarily the person, but the songs he put out made me open the Bible maybe for the first time.
And you're certainly not alone in that, because I've had more people mention that particular album. Phil Keaggy is my best friend. And I can't believe how many people say they came to Lord going to Phil's concerts. And yeah, no, you're definitely not alone. It's just, there's something that will reach everybody. There's something that, you know, God doesn't say we all have to live in Des Moines and go to a certain church and be a certain age, and then that's it. When we get to become a Christian, he's opened the door all the way around. Everybody's welcome. So it doesn't have to be one certain way that it spoke to you. You know, you described to me what spoke to you, and I told you what spoke to me, and we talked to somebody else. And well, here's what turned the corner for me. You know who Lee Strobel is?
I know the name from books I've read, but I can't place it.
He had the Cakes for Christ and all that. And Lee and I were talking, and he said that there's actually been a survey done, and it's hard for me to fathom this, but he said there's an actual survey that says an average 11 times that something has been witnessed to you. Somebody spoke something, or an event or something. He said about 11 times average when people, all of a sudden it comes together and they become a Christian. So it's like these little seeds. You know, I've always said I'm a seed planter. I'm the seed planter. I know that. That's my role. And that's why I felt I was a minister and didn't want to be a pastor, because I wanted to just, Johnny, I want to go plant seeds, you know, on the road. But yeah, there's all these different ways. You know, the door is open.
Thank you for sharing that, and I hand you over to my good friend Sir Warren.
Okay.
Yes, you have some very deep stories there, Ken, and I can see in your actions how they affected you. I can see how deep they are, and it goes to your soul. So I'm gonna get off that subject though, and you mentioned something about writing books, and your book, The Rooftop, it details much about Let It Be era. You were known as the man with the white suit.
White coat.
While they recorded atop your offices. Will you please tell us all about that?
About the day on the roof?
The day on the roof, and why they called you the man in the white suit.
Well, I was the man in the white coat. What happened, and this is really, talk about my opening line almost with you, was being in the right place at the right time. And I would be in and out at London, you know, I'd work out of the London office, but mainly I worked out of the LA office. And I would come into London different times to work on different things with them. And I just happened to be in London working out of the office that week. Just happened to be. And so we had talked about they needed for the Let It Be film. The part of it was they wanted to kind of close it off with a live performance because the Beatles hadn't performed live for over 2 years. And so the concept, and you've read about all these different things, whether they do it in the Coliseum or do it on a cruise ship or do it in an old flour mill or just all these different crazy ideas they had. But, things weren't going real smooth with the Beatles and it was just didn't come together. It just wasn't coming together. And one of the things was, maybe this is kind of inside at the time, is they didn't really want to go off someplace for a few days with each other, I don't think. And so anyway, it wasn't getting done. Well, Michael Lindsay Hogg was running out of time. And while I was there, the idea to go up on the roof was, well, here we are. We don't have to take the band on the road. We don't have to take equipment. We don't have to rent hotels. We don't have to book flights. We don't have to do all these things and get all these permits and stuff. And so to get it done, they said, well, we're going to go up on the roof. Now, I was in the office and I started noticing some noise in the building, like some building. And it's a 5-story building, so there's a lot of, floors and offices. And I just thought somebody was having their office remodeled, or I didn't know, didn't pay any attention because the noise was up towards the top of the building. And I was most of the time on kind of what would be the second floor. I think I was using George Harrison's office while I was there because he was off someplace. And so Mal Emmons comes in to the office I used and says, hey, Ken, we're going up on the roof. I said, what do you mean? He said, we're going to go up and shoot the film now in about 15 minutes. Well, this is January and it's freezing cold. I'm from California. And when I would fly into London, I didn't really dress. I dressed like a Californian because I would get off the plane, be picked up immediately at the door of the airport, Heathrow, in a limo and taken straight to my hotel, and I have to walk into the hotel, and I'd be picked up and then taken to Apple and just walk, So it didn't really matter whether I had warm clothes or not because I was only outside for seconds at a time. Right. And so when I heard we were going up on the roof and it was cool that day, I thought I got to get a coat. So I ran out the door, and Savile Row had a lot of tailors and men's stores and all that. And the first place I came to, which could have been next door, I don't know, because there was a place right next door. Walked in the door, and there was a white coat on display there. And I said, it looked like a top coat. So I said, I'll take that. And I bought it and ran out and put it on and got up on the roof. And it turns out it was a white coat. And of course, all the rock and rolls, everybody, if you look at the picture, everybody's wearing black, except George had those green pants on and Ringo had a red coat on, but things were basically black or extremely dark blue. So for me, fortunately, I stand out because I'm the man in the white coat. You can see me if I'm in frame on the film or in pictures, it's easy to spot me. So that was just a really kind of another neat thing that happened for me besides being there. And then the fact that they invited me up there, and I think really Mal and I became extremely close. And the reason I had such good reception with the Beatles in general is because Mal spoke for me in them, and Mal trusted me, and so he imparted this trust to them, and Mal told them I was a good guy, So Mal had a lot to say about things like that. So the only 4 people up there that day that weren't working wasn't a Beatle or Billy Preston or the film guys, sound guys, were me and Yoko and Maureen, Ringo's wife, and Chris O'Dell, who was Peter Asher's assistant. And Chris just talked her way up there. She thought she was going to get pulled off at any minute because she wasn't supposed to be up there. Nobody was supposed to be up there from the offices because the roof couldn't hold the weight. But for some reason, I was up and they put the 4 of us against this chimney, which is not a working chimney, so it wasn't keeping us warm. But and so there was only four people in the audience that day, and we all got comp tickets too. I like to joke. And if you look at the picture up there, I could probably just lean forward and touch George. It was like 4 feet away.
Right.
That was really, and looking right in their faces.
Right. You mentioned Billy Preston. What did you think about the Beatles bringing him on and him playing for them? I'm interested in that because I like Billy Preston, and I think he put something into the Beatles that the Beatles were missing. And I just like to get your thoughts on that.
Well, there's a couple of things. First of all, typically the Beatles didn't go like, well, let's see, this person has a good resume and he's played on this many records. They totally went with just their vibes. A lot of the people that worked at Apple, they'd just walk in looking for a job and Beatles say, okay, come aboard, and
Right.
And so Billy, a little backstory. Bill and I started together at Capitol. Billy signed to Capitol when I was just there a few months. And so we worked together and became friends at Capitol before. And then one day, all of a sudden, we're both in London with the Beatles. And so now I am made the head of Apple in America. And then the Beatles worked out a deal with Capitol to bring Billy to Apple. So here's Billy and I kind of side by side. But when we first met, we were both making our bones. We were both very young. And so we had this history with each other. Billy was, the Beatles, especially George, really liked Billy. And he brought a soulful thing in. They really were into Ray Charles and all the roots rock and R&B and stuff from America. And here's Billy that just was this amazing person, amazing musician, and somebody they genuinely felt good around. They liked Billy. They liked what he had. He's the only person they ever put a name on the label other than their own.
That's correct.
It's amazing. So that was a giant amount of respect. In fact, there was rumors of Billy becoming the fifth Beatle. But you guys know more about the Beatles than I do in general. I guess it was John that said, well, why would we have a fifth Beatle when the four Beatles can't get along?
Right.
We have five people that don't get along. But then the reason that this thing really, they were really having a hard time getting along at the beginning of the filming and stuff. And George really just brought Billy in to kind of, something had happened is they still had very old values and traditions in there. They were always very courteous to me and treated me with great respect. And they didn't like to air their dirty laundry in front of people. It's like if somebody comes in your home when I was growing up and family was fighting, when they were there, we were all on our best, So the Beatles seemed to, I used to tease them. I'd say, you guys always used to put on a front for me, so I would work harder for you and like you. And because I just thought everything was so, and I'd be more enthusiastic about the company because I saw you guys were always got along, all this kind of stuff. But anyway, they put Billy in the room, and you've read about it, how things just kind of chilled out. And then I went in there, and people say, well, they were fighting during that time. All I saw was just guys having a great time. And I got thinking about later, they had Billy in the room for that reason. And now they got the guy that's running their company in America. They're certainly not going to sit there and get in fights with each other with both of us sitting in the room. So it was really fun, when they were. Yeah. So anyway, Billy was just a special person, and to the point that there would even be a discussion. I don't know how seriously, I never heard it, but that he could even consider to be a member. And I had great talent, the talent of their level.
Yes, I really like Billy myself, and that's why I asked the question. And thank you for that answer. You gave me a little bit of insight to that that I never had before. So thank you. You have many wonderful books to your credit as well. Will you tell us about those and where they might be available?
Right now, you can get them on Amazon or from my website, mainmansfield.com. I've got all the books on there. The books themselves, The Beatles, Bible, and Bodega Bay, is I had, my life had fallen apart in Nashville again. And I got a job offer to come to the California coast to run a boutique label, Mobile Fidelity Sound Labs, which is a record company that made gold CDs of the greatest albums of all time, whether it was Carole King's Tapestry or, Tea for the Tillerman by all the classic records, Supertramp and everybody. And so I was brought out to run that label. And so I closed up everything in Nashville and moved to the West Coast up in Northern California. And then it turns out the owner of the label, the reason he brought me forward was because he was very wealthy now and he just wanted to enjoy his money, and he had a home in Maine and a home in Miami and a home in, in California and all that. He wanted to go enjoy his homes and his money. And so he saw that I was a guy that had run all these different companies and it was a perfect person for coming out running his company. Well, I got out there and it turned out he couldn't let go of the company. And it was just a nightmare. And I found out I was the fifth person that he had done that to. Brought him out and then couldn't accept that somebody was going to take over his company and booted him out. So I was out there a few months and all of a sudden I'm out of a job and I moved everything from Nashville and cut off all my things. So I'm walking on the beach and everybody's always telling me I should write a book. And I said, nah. I'm walking on the beach and I'm having these conversations with God about what's happened to me after all this time. I'd never been fired, and I just got fired for the first time. I'm 56 or something like that. And then I just gotten a brand new computer, my first computer. I would go up and I started writing my conversations and what I said to God and what God said to me, I guess, and all that. And I don't journal. But I was journaling. I don't know why. I just did it. So I did this for a while, a few months. And then one day on the beach, I thought, well, wait a minute. I'm a Christian and I'm trying to put this together. Why did this happen to me? And I thought maybe if I go write about when I was on top of the world, or the world, and I suppose to my spiritual walk, I'll write about my time with the Beatles and just see if I can start putting something together here. If I can just put these two people, this guy on top of the world, this guy right now is walking on a beach, without a job. And so I started writing the Beatles things. And after a while, I came up to the beach one day and Connie says, well, the book's finished. And I said, what are you talking about? I'm not writing a book. She said, yes, you are, and it's finished. Well, I said, I'm not even showing you. I've shown you a few things I've written, my Christian things, my talk with God, but I'm not writing a book. She said, yes, you are, and it's finished. Well, I went back to my computer, and I pulled up the stories, and I'd written exactly the same number of Beatles stories that I'd written Christian stories. So I thought, well, I'll pull out some pictures of me with the Beatles and stuff, and I just put it all together and decided how I would lay out a book if it was a book. Went down to Kinko's and had it run off, and I got back with this stack of pages. I went, oh my gosh, this is a book. I never thought about this. And so I thought, but I don't want to try and release a book. I mean, I've been in the music business. The music business, as you know, is 95% of business of rejection. Because most people, the odds of making it, so you're always really coming from behind. I thought, why don't I want to go in another business that's even worse, I understand, of getting your book published? So I'm not going to fool with it. Nancy Alcorn, who's the president of Mercy Ministries, was our house guest the following weekend. And I gave her the manuscript. I said, look, I said, I just wrote this thing, and I know you're an author. You've got some books out. And I just wanted to see what you think of it. And she said, well, I'll read it on the way home back to Nashville on the plane. She got back to Nashville, and this is a funny thing, and I've come across this before. She said, my life's ministry, that's all I do. So you wrote about Jesus and all this stuff in this book, about the parts I really liked was the Beatle parts, because I don't usually get that stuff. She said, I have an agent, would you mind if I showed it to my agent? Well, she gives it to the agent goes crazy when the book called me. He said, I would like to represent you on the book, and the big book convention is happening in 5 weeks. If you and I can put a contract together, I'll represent you. We did. He went down there. Brahman Holman, the largest Christian publisher probably at the time, they just fell out over the thing, and I got a book deal. Well, the book. That's good. And so now I've written this book, and Warren, I really thought it was just a one-off. Yeah, okay, I'll write a book. But the senior vice president, Brahman Holman, sat me down. He said, Ken, you're an author. And I said, no, I'm not. I wrote a book. He said, no, you're an author. I encourage you to write more. So right. 7 books later.
Right. That's a great example of divine intervention. That that is so great. Good story, and I appreciate you telling me it.
Well, Connie said the whole time, I said, Connie, I don't want to do this. She said, no, God's got his hands all over this. She kept saying, no, God's got his hands all over this. And I said, okay, I want to tell this one story. I said, okay, looks like I'm going to get a book deal. If this is meant to be, if they make this much of an offer to me for the book, I'll know it's God's hands on it. Well, the fleece I set out was a certain figure. The agent goes in, and the publisher offered him twice as much.
Wow.
And then he went in and negotiated up and got twice as much as that. So, okay, I guess you're right, Connie. God's hands on this.
Yes, he had his hands all over it. That's for sure.
Yeah.
You mentioned this a little earlier, but what was the big difference between living in LA and living in Nashville area?
Well, the difference is creativity. By the time I left Nashville, things had gotten so big, and it was now, instead of creative people making the decisions and running the companies and being behind the records, it was lawyers and executives, and just it was more of a business. And boy, I get back to Nashville, and you get off the airplane, you just want to write a song, you want to make a record. The creativity was just almost stifling. It's just so powerful. And I'd walk into a restaurant and somebody said, "Hey, you're Ken Mansfield, aren't you?" I said, "Yeah." "Hey, would you like to write a song? I was thinking about this song. You want to write it with me?" And the studios are just humming, and so one thing that was different about Nashville was the heart of the place is that everybody was for everybody else. We were all in this together, and so the famous artists were pulling for the unfamous artists, and everybody you'd be in a room with four people sitting around picking or something, but everybody was the same. There was no "I'm a star and you're not." It's just like this camaraderie and this trying to pull each other along. And the first thing that happened when I went to Nashville was different than LA. They said, "Oh, you just got here. Have you found a place to live yet? Do you want to come over for dinner? And have you found a church yet?" Those are the three questions.
Wow.
A place to live, a place to eat, and a place to worship.
Wow. What about London?
London made LA look like rock and roll on training wheels. I mean, London just vibrated. Oh my gosh, the clubs, and you had, like we did in LA, you had all these bands that became so giant just playing around town. And in London, the scene was over 5 o'clock in the morning, more of an all-night party, hard rocking, very flamboyant. Of course, I'm with the Beatles, so the doors are open to every place, and I might be going to a club with Paul, that kind of thing, because Paul was free to roam more in London, and so it was just from the way for me to see London. My wife Connie went on tour to England on a vacation, and she saw more of England than I ever did, because I was always, in a really kind of confined thing. I never really got out to the countryside, except maybe Ringo's house. He had a house a little bit out in the country, but.
Right. I can imagine too busy working very hard to go out and explore. Yeah. I can understand that. I hate to bring this name up because I don't really like it myself, but Alan Klein.
Gee, I'm surprised that's the name you brought up after that introduction.
He offered you triple the salary to stay with Apple when you parted.
Yeah.
What made you turn down that offer and move on?
Well, Klein had a mistaken impression of my importance with Paul, because Paul was a holdout. He needed to get Paul into the fold, and he had the impression that I had a lot to say into Paul's thinking, which I didn't.
Right.
Because Paul and Cass were the two people that were responsible for bringing me aboard, and I'd spent a lot of time with Paul. So if he could keep me aboard, because I'd already resigned, or he said I was leaving in such and such time. If he could keep me aboard, he felt he had a chance, just building a team that was favorable to Paul. And so he flew to LA, and I'd already accepted the position with Ron Cass as the vice president of MGM. And I'd heard about Klein. In fact, Klein was known to not have wasn't in the Catholic choir or anything like that. He was not a nice guy. I'm sorry, that's what it was. And he had just come down the street from stealing $3 million from the Rolling Stones and walks into Apple and gets. I was just crazy.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Yeah, and my loyalty was to Ron Cass, because Ron Cass and Stanley Gordico were the two people I learned the most from in the music business as an executive. I just really idolized both of them for how. And so here was Cass, who got really forced out by Klein. It was just sad.
Right.
And so Klein comes to LA. He said, "I know you resigned, but I want you to stay." And he said, I thought it was a famous statement. "I don't know what you make, but because I was still paid by Capital. That was part of Apple's deal with me. He said, Capital still paid my salary." And so he said, "I don't know what you make, but as soon as you say yes, as of the moment, you make 3 times as much as you used to." And I just couldn't do it. I didn't want to be with him, but he was so persuasive. There was something about this man was a genius. He was a deal maker,
Right.
He wouldn't stop. So I said, "Look, I was really playing a lot of tennis there, and this is the craziest story. It's still crazier than anything I've ever done. And I was really playing a lot of tennis in tournaments in LA. Got clubs, and Klein, I heard, was like to play tennis too. Well, this guy was like an egg on 2 drumsticks. Never looked like he'd been outside of a building. Just, it was in New York. Anyway, so I said, "I tell you what, Alan, let's play tennis tomorrow. And if you can beat me in a set of tennis, I'll come with you." Because I just thought it was just a way for me to humiliate him, or I don't know.
Yeah, so, what a deal.
We get there, and I couldn't get the ball past this guy. I'd never seen any. I was just crazy, And so, you play tennis, or do you know how tennis works?
I know how tennis works. Yes, I watch it, but I don't play it.
So you gotta, as soon as you get to winning 6 games, then you win the set. But you have to win a set by 2 games. So if you're 6-5, you got to get to 7-5, or on and on.
Right.
I beat him 13-11.
Wow.
I thought this game was never going to end. Then I realized what I'd gotten myself into, because
I can imagine, because he don't look like a tennis player to me either.
But I went to Ron Cass and told him, I said, Klein has flown over here just to talk to me, and he's made me this great offer. And I do have a family and all this, and it's hard to turn it down, Ron, but my loyalty is to you, and I just really don't know what to do. And and I know the one thing is that if I become Klein's guy, that's going to stick with me the rest of my life. And so this is what Cass is telling me. He said, "But look," he said, "I'm not going to discourage you either way. All I'm going to say to you is, to help you make up your mind, is, Ken, if you lay down with pigs, you get up dirty. If you lay down with pigs, you get up dirty." And he says, "That's all I'm going to say."
Right.
So,
yeah, that seemed like a hard deal to refuse, but I think he did the right thing.
He also said, "By the way, I will give you the Rolling Stones and Donovan to be part of your job, in addition to the Beatles." Now that's a pretty heavy offer.
Yeah, it is. God, like I said, that was a big deal to refuse. So I understand what you're saying. And with that being said, I'm going to hand it off to the Bulldog. I know he's sitting there patiently waiting, and I went a little overboard here, but I hope he don't bite me. But hey, Bulldog, it's your turn.
I was just enjoying listening to you guys.
We got about 15 more minutes, Bob, if that's good for you.
I'm good. We should be able to wrap it up in that. Thank you for being on. I know each book that an author does, you have a certain love for each piece of work, and each book is part of yourself. But I was just wondering, I think you said you've done 8. Out of those 8, do you have a favorite?
Well, I do. The Beatle books, the 3 Beatle books have been the most successful. I wrote my first novel, which I think is the best thing I've ever done. And it's really drawn from life experiences. It was in Book Before the Roof. My last 2 books are, to me, the 2 best books I've written. So, but just personally, the book called Philco, it took me 18 years to write that book. And it was just something, I just knew that God said there's a time for this book. But not yet, because I started writing it 18 years ago. He said, you just wait, there's a time for it. And one day I just thought it was time. And it's an incredible book. Oh gosh, how humble I am. It's real, it's fiction based on real life happenstances in my life and things I observed. So I'm going to encourage anybody to read one of my books is read Philco.
I'm going to go for that one next. I enjoyed your other work very much, but I had seen the description of Philco, and when I saw that, I was intrigued. So especially since you said that, I'll pick that one up next and read that one. Go ahead.
No, my one of my other favorites is Between Wyoming, which is my least selling book. And up until I wrote Philco, it was kind of my personal. Authors, we have different aspects in our brains in writing, and certain books are really an accomplishment in some areas. Others have different meanings to us when we're writing. So sometimes, probably The Roof is the best book I wrote. But then you have these little personal favorites, like your little sister or something. There's a lot of kids in your family with this. Anyway, so I'm sorry, I'm rambling. Never mind.
No, not at all. I think it was a good insight. I'm going to read that one next. You said you like to plant seeds, and some of these, I guess, were sort of coming from apple seeds. But I was wondering, when you're on today, you're planting seeds, but in your ministry and such, how do you get the opportunity today to plant seeds? Are you still going to churches? Are you still doing outreach?
I am doing, I'm glad you said the word outreach, because that was the, I'm sorry.
Sure.
Outreach was what I based everything on. That was my whole purpose, as I did outreach, and that was my approach to my ministry. So, oh yeah, I have quit touring. And I do maybe 6 things a year, and that's when something just comes along that I want to do. They'll make me a really great offer, or it's a great opportunity. Or and traveling, I hate traveling these days, so I don't like really rough travels and long times on the road. So if something is easy for me to do, and I do it. And there's been a couple of things that I've been doing, like recent things have been really cool outreach things, or really cool Beatles things, just things that are just, you almost can't refuse to do. One of my favorite ones that was recent was a large corporation, the hospitality industry had a large convention. And hospitality industry, people own hotels and restaurant chains and all that kind of stuff. And about 50% of the makeup were Christians, because the basis of the thing was sponsored by Christians, but 50% were non-Christians. And so I was invited to do their prayer breakfast. And so it gave me a chance to really reach to a lot of people, and it really, truly outreach, because half the were Christians wanted to reach out to the half that were Christians. And the fact that I was with the Beatles, see, here we go again, that made them receptive to me.
So these kind of are apple seeds, right? You're getting the apple story and spreading the seeds. You have an open door if you'd like to come on the show again anytime. All you have to do is let Warren or I know. So if there's any time you want to come on, we're blessed to have you. We definitely want you back. So anytime you have something you want to share, come on. All you have to do is ring the bell with an email or a message. And
I've already invited myself back for when the 50th anniversary of the Let It Be thing next April or May, when that comes up. I would like to get together with you guys again. If that's okay.
It's more than okay. It makes our day. So I just
Yes.
thank you for being here so much, and I just hand back to my friend Warren.
Okay. I got one question. Well, actually, two questions. First of all, I want you to tell us about your website, social media, where fans can find your books and such. But first, I want to ask about them pictures that are behind you. I'm a graphic artist, and I am enjoying looking at these pictures. And I'm wondering what that letter is beside John on the one picture, and the picture below is some awesome work there. Who might be the artist?
Well, I don't know who drew the picture below. Excuse me, Warren. Um, the top one, and if you saw the rest of my office, it's just covered with these pictures. It just happens to be the end of the office. It doesn't have anything on it. But John Lennon wrote me this letter about Zapple. And my relationship with John was really cool in that he just enlisted me for his little vision of Zapple Records, which is a record division of Apple that was not intended to make money. He didn't care. He just wanted to do some wild things. He would do it. He would want to have readings with Richard Brodigan or, things like that. It was just a pet of his. And so he just wrote me a letter saying he was going to come to New York and don't spread it around too much, but we'll get together. And he wanted the Zapple label to be silver and not white, just that kind of things. And I never thought anything about it because I used to get stuff. But my secretary, and he sent that picture along with it in the same envelope, and it says, "I'm at 3 Savile Row most days," what he wrote under the picture. And my secretary, and we had secretaries in those days. So all the PC people, that's what we were called, or they were called. So, and now they're executive assistants. But she was just intrigued by all things. So she had that put together and framed and just gave it to me one day. And I would have never thought about keeping it, but it was, he drew a little picture at the bottom of he and Yoko, and it was really turned out to be very kind of special.
Right.
The one below was Apple's Christmas card in 68 or 9, I forget. And that one was from Mal. I got that one from several people at Apple. Mal wrote a real sweet thing to be on there. And there's something about it that touched me. Mal and I were such dear friends, and just, I don't know. I just kept that. I threw away most stuff. I never kept stuff.
Wow. I wish you wouldn't have thrown away anything.
Yeah. The only thing that I didn't get rid of were things I just didn't get rid of. They just ended up in boxes, and I never even paid any attention. And when I started going through stuff for the Beatles Bible in Bodega Bay, I found all this stuff that I had. It just hadn't got thrown away. That's all.
Well, do me a favor. The next time you go through your boxes and want to throw something away, throw it my way, would you please?
Well, I got a few things I'm going to sell. I have a Life of Lions album that John signed to me that I didn't even know he signed it. It was in my collection. Somebody noticed it one day. They'd written on the back of it. I still got that. And when I was working with George Harrison on the White Album, George, when the album came out, he said, "Hey, you want me to sign a White Album for you and just say something, that make you look like a big man?" He said, and I would never ask him for anything like that. And I said, "Well, I don't know, just write something groovy with love from George, And so he wrote to Ken, something groovy with love on the back on the front of the album cover. So
that is so great.
I'm going to sell that. I got a couple other things that I do still have left around. But.
Okay. All right. I'm going to get into, since we're running low on time here, tell us about your websites, your social media, where fans can find your books and such things.
All my books are on Amazon, of course, but I have them on my website, mainmansfield.com, MAINMANSFIELD, like mainmansfield.com. And because on my site, then I sign the books to everybody, to whatever they can suggest I say, whoever they want me to sign them to, and they are discounted on there. I feel like I'm a commercial right now, but it's that's all I've whittled my website down to. All it is now is my books, because I'm not looking to do anything else now except just be a writer and an author. So.
Well, that's great, and I'll be sure to post it on this video for you.
Yeah.
I appreciate that. And with that being said, I'm going to hand it off to the Bulldog so he can close out the show.
Okay. Okay.
Well, I know that sometimes we close the show with us singing the end, but you said that in order to perform as a singer, you require at least $1 million, and we don't have that. But I have an idea. There's a quote I really like that came from a guy named Ken Mansfield. So how about if I read the quote instead of us singing?
Well, the $1 billion is to pay off the people that I insult by trying to sing. So,
Me too. I'm with you. But I really like what I came across that you said. So how about we close on that? Our show is called Tomorrow Never Knows from the song, but I like this quote. You said, tomorrow really never knows, does it? Only God has that figured out. And we close on that happy note.
Yeah, great. That is happy. Thank you, guys.